On a red-eye flight from Los Angeles to New York, tension sparked the moment the plane's doors closed. In the quiet of the premium cabin, Simone Rivers sat calmly in her first-class seat. Dressed smartly in a tailored blazer and exuding an air of quiet confidence, Simone had chosen this flight for both business and pleasure. Yet as the cabin lights dimmed and passengers settled into their routines, a confrontation was about to shatter the tentative calm. Tessa Monroe, a flight attendant known for her strict adherence to protocol, moved briskly down the aisle. Her uniform was immaculate, and her manner carried an unmistakable tone of authority. As she approached Simone's row, Tessa's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Without a greeting or a pause, she leaned toward Simone and demanded, in a clipped tone, that Simone vacate her first-class seat immediately. Tessa accused Simone of sneaking in, of occupying a space reserved for those who had rightfully earned it. Simone's heart raced. She had booked that seat weeks ago and knew her reservation was valid. Yet Tessa's tone was unyielding, and her accusation cut through the cabin's muted hum like a razor. Other passengers, mostly clad in crisp business attire or luxurious travel wear, began to take notice. Whispers and sideways glances spread through the cabin as everyone tried to understand the unfolding scene. Simone maintained her composure. Despite the shock and the sting of the accusation, she met Tessa's glare with steady eyes. "I'm sorry, but I have a confirmed reservation for this seat," Simone replied, her voice calm yet firm. Her words were measured, reflecting a deep-seated resolve not to be cowed by unfounded allegations. Tessa's face tightened further, and her tone grew harsher. "I don't care what you booked. This seat is for those who have earned it, and you're clearly not one of them," she insisted, her voice low but laced with disdain. The declaration sent ripples through the first-class cabin. Passengers who had been absorbed in magazines or quiet conversation now watched the exchange with growing curiosity and unease. For a moment, the cabin fell silent except for the low hum of the engines. Simone, though visibly perturbed by the unwarranted confrontation, refused to be intimidated. Every detail, from Tessa's rigid posture to the skeptical expressions on nearby faces, spoke of a situation that was far more than a simple misunderstanding. It was a clash of authority and dignity, a moment when prejudice crept into what was meant to be a routine journey. As Tessa's accusations hung in the air, Simone's determination began to replace her initial shock. She knew that her quiet strength in the face of injustice could set a powerful example. With a measured exhale, Simone prepared to stand her ground, unaware that this confrontation was only the beginning of a larger struggle for respect and fairness on that flight. Despite the initial shock of the confrontation, Simone Rivers remained seated, her posture upright and her eyes calm. As the cabin slowly resumed its routine, she became the center of quiet attention. Around her, fellow travelers, well-dressed in business suits, designer dresses, and expensive accessories, observed her with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Whispers floated in the air as some passengers exchanged puzzled glances, while others appeared intrigued by the composure with which Simone handled the situation. In the midst of the ensuing hush, Simone recalled the events leading up to this moment. Earlier in the boarding process at LAX, she had noticed subtle hints of tension among the crew, but nothing had foreshadowed the dramatic accusation she now faced. With a confirmed ticket and a reservation that was indisputable, Simone was determined not to let baseless allegations tarnish her experience. Her calm demeanor was a testament to years of navigating challenging situations with grace and poise. Across the aisle, a few passengers who had witnessed the initial outburst began to murmur among themselves. Some speculated quietly, "Is it really true that she's not supposed to be here?" while others shook their heads in disbelief at the audacity of the flight attendant's claim. In these moments, Simone's calm presence served as an anchor. She exuded confidence not out of arrogance but from a deep-seated belief in her own worth and rights. Her eyes, steady and resolute, told a story of a woman who would not be pushed aside by unfair treatment. Meanwhile, Tessa Monroe, once the epitome of strict professionalism, now appeared increasingly agitated. Her insistence had drawn attention, and the murmurs around the cabin grew louder with each passing minute. Some passengers seemed to side with Tessa, possibly swayed by her assertive tone, while others found her behavior off-putting. The mixed reactions only underscored the stark contrast between Simone's dignified calm and Tessa's aggressive approach. A particularly well-dressed gentleman in the row behind Simone leaned over to his companion and whispered, "It's strange to see such hostility over a seat. She looks like she belongs here." His hushed comment resonated with several others, slowly shifting the tide of opinion. In the face of Tessa's baseless accusations, Simone's quiet confidence began to win over skeptics. As the flight continued, the subdued light from the overhead bins and the soft hum of the engines provided a gentle backdrop to the unfolding drama. Simone took a moment to reflect on her journey, not just the physical flight from Los Angeles to New York, but also the internal journey of resilience and self-respect. Each time she caught a lingering glance or a subtle nod of support from a fellow passenger, her determination grew stronger. In a small gesture of solidarity, a woman seated near Simone reached out with a supportive smile, silently affirming that Simone's presence was not only justified but also admired. That simple act rippled through the cabin, prompting a few others to offer silent affirmations. It became clear that, in that confined space, the fight was not solely between Simone and Tessa, it was a broader clash over fairness, dignity, and the right to be oneself without prejudice. Simone's thoughts turned to the upcoming hours of the flight. She resolved to remain poised despite the simmering tension. The incident, though unwarranted and humiliating, had awakened something within her, a determination to stand firm and to ensure that the truth of her integrity would ultimately prevail over ignorance and bias. As the flight advanced into the night, the first-class cabin remained a quiet battleground of glances, murmurs, and the occasional supportive smile. Simone sat resolutely, her mind focused not on the negativity but on the strength she derived from knowing her worth. In that moment, amidst the luxury and the whispered judgments, she silently vowed to let her actions speak louder than any accusation, a promise that would soon be tested even further as the conflict escalated. As the flight continued its journey across the nation, the atmosphere in the premium cabin darkened further with tension. Tessa Monroe, once a picture of crisp professionalism, now appeared increasingly suspicious and aggressive. Her eyes darted from Simone Rivers to other parts of the cabin as if she were searching for evidence to confirm her unfounded claims. In a deliberate shift, Tessa returned to Simone's row, her tone now laced with contempt. "Miss Rivers," she said sharply, "you really do not belong here." The words, delivered with a sneer, reverberated in the hushed space, drawing the attention of several passengers. Simone, ever poised, met Tessa's accusation with quiet dignity. "I have a valid reservation," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "I belong exactly where I've been seated." Her response, though measured, carried an unspoken challenge, a refusal to be cowed by prejudice dressed up as protocol. Tessa's face flushed with indignation. "A reservation? What use is a reservation if you're just sneaking into a space reserved for genuine first-class patrons?" she demanded. The tone was accusatory, as if Simone were an impostor daring to defy established boundaries. The surrounding passengers, dressed in elegant attire that spoke of their business and leisure, exchanged looks of curiosity and concern. Whispers spread like wildfire, some questioning Tessa's motives, others pondering Simone's integrity. In the midst of this escalating verbal spar, the tension in the cabin became almost palpable. Tessa's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scrutinized Simone as though searching for a flaw, any misstep that would justify her hostility. Simone's calm, in contrast, radiated from her like a steady light, a beacon of resilience amid the storm of accusations. With each measured word, Simone reaffirmed her right to occupy the seat, emphasizing that her presence was not an act of defiance but of entitlement earned through proper booking. Tessa, unable to contain her suspicions, stepped closer. "I've seen how you carry yourself," she said in a low, bitter tone. "You act as if you're too important for the rest of us. It's not right that someone like you takes up space meant for those who truly belong here." The insinuation was as clear as it was hurtful, a suggestion that Simone's very identity was at odds with the class's standards. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder. Some glanced at Simone with admiration for her composure, others shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether to side with the stern flight attendant or the dignified traveler. In that critical moment, Simone's silence was as powerful as any retort. She simply looked Tessa in the eye and said, "I am here because I have every right to be here. I do not need anyone's permission to occupy my seat." Her words, calm yet resolute, challenged the deep-seated prejudices that Tessa sought to enforce. A few passengers began to murmur their support for Simone, their voices soft but determined. One man in a dark suit leaned over to a neighbor and remarked, "That's the kind of grace we need in times like these." The ripple of support was subtle, but it was enough to undermine Tessa's aggressive stance. Yet Tessa was not ready to relent. With a sharp exhale, she leaned in once more, her voice barely above a whisper but charged with venom. "You must leave, Simone," she insisted, "or I will have no choice but to have you removed." The threat was clear. Tessa intended to use her authority as a flight attendant to forcibly expel Simone if she did not comply. For a long, heavy moment, silence reigned. Simone's heart pounded, but her face remained impassive, a mask of determined calm. "I will not leave," she stated firmly. "I belong here, and I will not be bullied out of my rightful seat." Her declaration, though delivered quietly, resonated powerfully in the confined space of the cabin. The confrontation had now reached a critical juncture. Around them, a cluster of passengers watched, their expressions a mixture of shock and solidarity. Some seemed moved by Simone's quiet defiance, others were visibly uncomfortable, caught between the stern command of Tessa and the dignified resistance of Simone. In that moment, the cabin became a microcosm of a larger struggle, a battle between arbitrary authority and the unyielding strength of personal dignity. Tessa's eyes narrowed dangerously, and her tone turned icy. "Then you leave me no choice," she hissed, the threat of force lingering in her words. The cabin's ambient noise seemed to drop to a near hush as everyone waited to see what would come next. Simone, though shaken, held her ground, her resolve hardening with each passing second. In that standoff, the stark contrast between Tessa's suspicion and Simone's confident insistence became painfully clear. Simone was not a trespasser, she was a woman who had earned her seat through proper channels, and she would not allow anyone, especially not a prejudiced authority, to undermine her worth. The confrontation had grown beyond a mere misunderstanding, it had become a defining moment of courage in the face of injustice. With the tension in the premium cabin mounting to an unbearable level, Tessa Monroe's resolve took a darker turn. Having accused Simone Rivers of not belonging in first class, Tessa now escalated the situation further. "Since you refuse to leave, I am left with no alternative," Tessa declared loudly, her voice trembling with barely contained aggression. The threat was clear: if Simone did not vacate her seat, Tessa would be forced to remove her, by force if necessary. The announcement echoed sharply throughout the cabin, drawing the attention of every passenger. In the midst of the opulent surroundings, where polished leather seats and gleaming tray tables spoke of luxury, Simone's calm presence now stood as a stark challenge to Tessa's authoritarian demands. Simone's eyes, steady and unyielding, met Tessa's with a quiet defiance that silenced the murmuring crowd for an instant. "I have a confirmed reservation," Simone replied evenly, her voice carrying the weight of conviction. "I will not be intimidated into leaving a seat I rightfully occupy." Her words, measured and resolute, left no room for negotiation. Around them, a heavy silence fell as both crew and passengers watched the unfolding drama, each aware that the stakes were much higher than a mere seat assignment. Tessa's features contorted with anger as she stepped closer to Simone, her posture rigid and unyielding. "You are disrupting the order of this flight," she spat. "This is not merely about a reservation, it is about maintaining the standards of our service. I will not allow someone like you to sully the experience for everyone else." The insinuation was damning, a thinly veiled attack on Simone's identity, suggesting that her very presence was an affront to the sanctity of first class. As the confrontation intensified, whispers among the passengers grew louder. A few began to exchange skeptical looks toward Tessa, their expressions reflecting a dawning awareness that her behavior might be more about personal prejudice than genuine concern for service standards. However, others seemed to accept Tessa's harsh words, their faces hardening in agreement as they clutched their expensive accessories or adjusted their cufflinks. Simone remained composed throughout, her calm demeanor contrasting starkly with Tessa's growing agitation. "I do not need to apologize for being here," Simone said softly but with undeniable strength. "I earned my place through proper channels, and my presence does not diminish anyone else's experience." Her voice was clear, carrying across the cabin and resonating with those who had grown weary of Tessa's vitriolic accusations. Tessa's eyes flashed dangerously, and she leaned in even closer. "If you do not leave now, I will be forced to take matters into my own hands," she warned, her tone low and threatening. The implication was unmistakable. A physical removal was imminent if Simone continued to refuse compliance. In that charged moment, every detail, the stern set of Tessa's jaw, the unwavering calm in Simone's eyes, and the collective breath of the passengers, felt laden with meaning. Around the cabin, a few brave souls began to murmur their disapproval of Tessa's behavior. A middle-aged gentleman in a tailored suit shifted uncomfortably, while a young professional whispered, "That's not right, she belongs here." Even some of the crew, whose duty was to maintain order, looked unsettled by Tessa's escalating tone. Yet, Tessa pressed on, her voice rising with each word. "I will not allow this flight to be disrupted by your presence," she declared. "I demand that you vacate this seat immediately." At that moment, a voice from the back of the cabin broke through the tension, a firm, measured tone that carried the authority of experience. Marcus Allen, a lawyer traveling in business class, had been observing the exchange with growing dismay. Pulling out his phone, he began recording the incident. "This is outrageous," Marcus announced loudly enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. "Racial profiling has no place in our service. I demand an apology for this blatant act of discrimination." His intervention, unexpected yet resolute, sent a new wave of shock through the cabin. The cabin's atmosphere shifted once again. Some passengers looked toward Marcus with admiration, while others cast uncertain glances at Tessa, who now faltered for a split second. In that instant, the power dynamic in the cabin was altered. Tessa, faced with the challenge not only from Simone but now from a vocal legal professional, hesitated. I'm simply following protocol," she stammered, her earlier certainty wavering under the weight of the mounting evidence against her. Simone's eyes softened slightly at Marcus's intervention, and she allowed herself a small nod of gratitude. "Thank you for speaking up," she said quietly. Yet she remained steadfast in her refusal to leave, her dignity intact despite the escalating chaos. Tessa's response turned cold and measured once more. "If you do not leave, I will have to call security," she threatened. Her words, delivered with an air of finality, left little room for compromise. The tension in the cabin had reached a fever pitch, passengers held their breath, and even the engine's low rumble seemed to quiet in anticipation of what might come next. For Simone, this was the ultimate test of her resilience. Despite the barrage of hateful insinuations and the threat of physical force, she stood firm, her inner strength lighting up the room like a beacon. "I will not be intimidated," she declared, her voice rising in quiet defiance. "I belong here, and I expect to be treated with the respect every passenger deserves." In that charged moment, the cabin was transformed from a mere space of luxury travel into a battleground for dignity and justice. The confrontation had escalated far beyond a simple dispute over a seat, it had become a struggle for respect, fairness, and the right to be oneself in the face of prejudice. Tessa's threats and Marcus's intervention were just the opening moves in a conflict that would soon test the very foundations of the airline service standards. As the tension in the cabin simmered after the initial confrontation between Simone Rivers and Tessa Monroe, a new voice suddenly broke through the charged atmosphere. At around 13:02 into the flight, Marcus Allen, an assertive lawyer traveling in business class, noticed that things were rapidly spiraling out of control. He had been quietly observing the unfolding drama, and his concern deepened when he realized that Tessa's aggressive accusations were taking on a distinctly discriminatory tone. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he pulled out his smartphone, discreetly beginning to record the encounter. He had seen enough. Tessa's words were laced with unfounded insinuations that Simone, a confident first-class traveler with a proven reservation, did not belong. When Tessa's voice rose in that moment, claiming that Simone was sneaking in and that her presence undermined the standards of the cabin, Marcus couldn't remain silent. "Excuse me," Marcus interjected, stepping into the aisle with calm authority. His tone was steady but firm as he addressed Tessa directly. "I have just recorded your comments, and I must say, such language constitutes racial profiling." His statement caught the attention of everyone nearby. The murmurs in the cabin hushed even further, and all eyes turned toward the trio standing in the narrow aisle between plush seats. Tessa's face flushed as she tried to regain control. "I'm simply enforcing our policies," she insisted, but Marcus's unwavering gaze cut through her feigned indifference. "Enforcing policy is one thing, but targeting a passenger based solely on her race is entirely unacceptable," he continued. "I demand an apology to Ms. Rivers for your inappropriate behavior." Simone, who had maintained her dignified composure throughout the earlier exchange, looked at Marcus with quiet gratitude. Her eyes, though tired from the emotional strain, shone with determination. The sudden intervention of Marcus had not only bolstered her resolve but had also begun to sway the opinions of the surrounding passengers. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Several passengers, previously uncertain of where they stood, now nodded in agreement. A well-dressed gentleman in the adjacent row whispered to his companion, "That man is speaking the truth. No one should be treated this way." Others pulled out their own smartphones, as if to record or validate Marcus's intervention. Tessa's eyes darted around the cabin, seeking an ally among her colleagues, but found only hesitant glances and shifting expressions. Her authority, once so unquestioned, now wavered under the weight of Marcus's measured yet pointed words. I'm following protocol," Tessa stammered, her tone losing some of its earlier steel. Marcus's voice remained steady. "Protocol does not include racial profiling. If you cannot treat a passenger with the respect due to her confirmed reservation, then you must retract your statement." His tone brooked no argument. He paused, giving the words time to settle among the hushed crowd. Simone, her posture still upright and her gaze unwavering, spoke softly but clearly, "I appreciate Mr. Allen standing up for me. I have every right to be here, and I will not be made to feel like an intruder in my own seat." Her words resonated with many, as the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. What had begun as a one-sided confrontation was now a battle for dignity and fairness. The cabin's tension reached a new peak. Passengers who had once observed silently now began to exchange looks of solidarity with Simone. A middle-aged woman in a chic outfit whispered to a nearby colleague, "I'm so tired of seeing this kind of behavior. Every traveler deserves respect." Even some of the crew, who had earlier been complicit in maintaining a hostile atmosphere, now looked troubled by Tessa's overreach. Marcus, still holding his phone steady as he recorded the scene, added, "This video evidence will speak for itself when we review it later with the airline management and any relevant authorities. I trust that our collective voice here will ensure that Ms. Rivers is treated fairly." His words were not merely a threat of documentation, they were a call to accountability. In that moment, Tessa's stance faltered. Realizing that the tide of public opinion was beginning to turn against her, she hesitated. I apologize if my actions seemed targeted," she managed, her voice quiet, almost inaudible in the now silent cabin. The apology, however, did little to assuage the palpable anger among many of the passengers. Some exchanged skeptical looks, knowing that an apology born of coercion could hardly restore dignity. Marcus looked directly at Tessa, his tone softening slightly but still firm. An apology must be sincere, and it must be accompanied by an acknowledgement of the wrongdoing, he said. Only then can we begin to mend the damage done here today. His words hung in the air, a solemn reminder that accountability was not optional. Simone nodded slightly, her eyes reflecting both relief and lingering hurt. The intervention of Marcus had, for a brief moment, restored a sense of justice in the cabin. As the flight continued its journey across the country, the recorded evidence on Marcus's phone promised that this incident would not vanish into obscurity. Instead, it would serve as a testament to the fact that even in the confined space of an airplane, the courage to speak up can shift the balance of power. The atmosphere, charged and dynamic, set the stage for what would be a defining moment in the lives of everyone on board. For Simone, it was the affirmation of her right to dignity. For Marcus, it was the fulfillment of his duty as a defender of justice. And for Tessa, it was a stark reminder that authority, when misused, would eventually be challenged by the collective voice of those who believed in fairness. In the wake of Marcus Allen's intervention, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin began to evolve. The air, once thick with tension and hostility, now carried hints of support and division. As passengers processed what had transpired, a quiet debate unfolded, splitting the cabin into factions, some siding with Simone Rivers and her rightful claim to her seat and others clinging to Tessa Monroe's earlier assertions. The cabin buzzed with murmurs and whispered opinions. A group of well-dressed travelers huddled near the window, discussing the events in hushed tones. "I never expected to see such boldness from a flight attendant," one remarked, shaking his head. "But when you film someone calling another passenger a fraud based on their race, you can't help but feel that something is deeply wrong." Another passenger, a businesswoman in a tailored suit, nodded solemnly as she adjusted her scarf. "I've seen it all on social media these days. It takes courage to stand up against discrimination, and Marcus's video might just be the evidence needed to expose a system that tolerates such behavior." Across the aisle, a few passengers expressed their solidarity with Simone. In a softly lit corner, a middle-aged man confided to his companion, "Simone's calm under pressure is admirable. I believe she belongs here, just as anyone else does." His words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement. Even among the dissenters, there was a growing realization that the narrative was shifting. A couple seated near the center of the cabin exchanged glances that said, "We must look beyond appearances and listen to what the evidence shows." Meanwhile, Tessa Monroe's position began to crumble. Her earlier stern demeanor gave way to hesitance as more passengers questioned her motives. The flight attendants, who once followed her orders without question, now exchanged subtle looks of uncertainty. One attendant, while restocking the beverage cart, murmured to another, "I'm not sure I agree with how she handled that situation. It felt more like an act of bias than of duty." Their hushed conversation slowly reached the ears of other crew members, who began to question whether the strict enforcement of rules was being tainted by personal prejudice. In the midst of the mounting debate, Simone Rivers remained the picture of serene dignity. She sat quietly, absorbing the shifting attitudes around her, her eyes occasionally meeting those of supportive strangers. Each glance of solidarity reinforced her inner resolve. "I have every right to be here," she thought. "I will not let baseless accusations define me." Her calm composure stood in stark contrast to the rising chaos, a beacon of quiet strength amid the storm of conflicting opinions. Marcus Allen, still recording the ongoing discussion, looked around at the divided faces in the cabin. "The truth is emerging," he said softly to himself. "And justice will have its day." His confidence was not merely rooted in his legal expertise but also in the collective support that was slowly crystallizing among the passengers. As he observed, even some of those who had once been indifferent were now leaning in, eager to share their own observations and affirm Simone's innocence. The cabin's energy, charged with both indignation and hope, reached a turning point when a well-dressed woman near the aisle stood up and addressed the group. "I have witnessed this incident from the start," she declared in a clear, authoritative voice. "Simone's presence here is entirely justified, and any attempt to dislodge her is nothing more than an act of discrimination. Her words resonated deeply, and soon, others joined her. The collective outcry grew steadily until even those who had hesitated before began to voice their support. As the flight continued toward its destination, the atmosphere transformed from one of covert tension to overt solidarity. Many passengers took out their phones, not to record further discord but to capture messages of support for Simone. Social media posts began to circulate among the travelers, each one a small act of defiance against the injustice they had witnessed. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect," one post read. "Today, we stand with Simone," said another. Throughout this period, Tessa Monroe's authority weakened further. Her initial forcefulness, which had seemed so absolute earlier, was now undermined by the collective insistence of those around her. Even some of her colleagues, who had once followed her orders unquestioningly, began to appear reluctant, their expressions shadowed with doubt. It was evident that the crew, while still bound by protocol, were not immune to the ethical implications of their actions. The unfolding events not only underscored the importance of individual dignity but also revealed how crucial community support is when challenging systemic bias. As more voices joined the chorus, the cabin became a microcosm of a broader social awakening, one where the power of unity could overcome the divisive forces of prejudice. By the time the flight neared its final approach, the initial narrative had been thoroughly disrupted. The once dominant voice of Tessa Monroe was now dwarfed by the collective call for fairness. Passengers and crew alike had joined in a quiet yet potent stand against injustice. Simone Rivers, with her unwavering calm, had become an emblem of resilience. And Marcus Allen, by documenting every moment, ensured that the truth would not be buried. In that charged atmosphere, it was clear, even within the confines of a first-class cabin thousands of feet in the air, a single act of courage could ignite a movement. And as the final moments of the flight ticked by, every passenger in that cabin carried with them the understanding that respect and dignity are rights that cannot, and should not, be compromised. Despite the growing chorus of support for Simone Rivers, Tessa Monroe was not yet ready to let the matter rest. Determined to regain control over the situation, Tessa decided to escalate her tactics further. At around 23:16 into the flight, when the cabin was abuzz with the latest revelations, Tessa leaned in close to Simone with a calculated glare. In a hushed yet pointed tone, she accused Simone of a new offense, stealing a bracelet from a decorative display near the galley. "Miss Rivers, I have reason to believe that you took a bracelet from the cabin's jewelry collection," Tessa declared, her voice low but carrying the weight of a grave accusation. The words fell like a bombshell in the already charged silence. This was no longer a dispute over seating or vague accusations, this was a deliberate attempt to frame Simone for theft. Simone's eyes widened for a split second, but her expression quickly returned to one of unwavering calm. "I did not take any bracelet," she replied evenly. "I have not disturbed anything on this flight." Her tone was cool, almost clinical, a stark contrast to the rising emotion around her. Yet Tessa's tone left no room for doubt in her mind, this was an act of retaliation meant to provoke a serious confrontation. A murmur ran through the cabin as passengers absorbed the new allegation. Some looked at Tessa with renewed suspicion, while others still clung to her version of events. A young professional, sitting in the row directly behind Simone, leaned over and whispered, "This is outrageous. Accusing her of theft is a desperate move." His voice, though soft, carried the weight of indignation shared by many. Tessa, seemingly emboldened by the mixed reactions, pressed on. "I saw you near the display area," she insisted, her eyes darting about as if to gather support. "It appears you're trying to hide something." Her words were carefully chosen, designed to sow further doubt among the passengers. Yet, as she spoke, a sense of inevitability began to take hold. Several passengers who had been wavering now looked firmly in Simone's direction, their expressions a mix of empathy and disbelief at Tessa's persistence. Marcus Allen, who had already intervened earlier, immediately sensed that Tessa's latest move was the culmination of a deliberate attempt to provoke Simone into a defensive reaction. He raised his voice slightly, ensuring his words were heard by those gathered near the front. "This is nothing more than an attempt to defame Ms. Rivers," he stated clearly. "I have witnessed her conduct throughout this flight, and there is absolutely no evidence of any wrongdoing on her part." Marcus's intervention was met with approving nods from many passengers, further isolating Tessa. The cabin's mood shifted noticeably as more people began to rally around Simone. A middle-aged woman, her face etched with empathy, remarked, "I have seen Simone's calm throughout all of this. She is not a thief, she is a woman who belongs in first class just like everyone else." Her voice, quiet yet resolute, sparked further conversation among those who had previously been on the fence. In response, Tessa's demeanor grew increasingly defensive. "I am only doing my job," she insisted, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "I must ensure that all passengers are treated according to our policies." Yet even as she repeated this refrain, her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The evidence of her previous misconduct, recorded by Marcus and witnessed by multiple passengers, made her claims sound hollow. As the confrontation deepened, the tension in the cabin rose to a near-overwhelming pitch. Passengers started to whisper louder, some openly condemning Tessa's behavior while others exchanged worried glances. In one particularly charged moment, a gentleman in a sharp suit stood up from his seat and declared, "No one should be subjected to this kind of treatment. We must demand accountability." His words, bold and unyielding, resonated with many around him. Simone, though under immense pressure, maintained her composure. "I assure you," she said firmly, "I have done nothing wrong. My conduct has been exemplary, and I stand by my right to be here." Her voice, steady as a metronome, cut through the cacophony of accusations. Each word she spoke reinforced the truth of her innocence. Tessa, realizing that her attempt to frame Simone might be backfiring, attempted to salvage control by calling for security assistance. "I need to report this incident formally," she announced, her tone now bordering on panic. "There is evidence of theft, and I must insist that appropriate measures be taken." Her demand hung in the air, but the earlier support for Simone made it increasingly difficult for the crew to act solely on Tessa's word. Marcus Allen stepped forward again, his expression resolute. "I have already documented every moment of this encounter, and all the evidence points to Ms. Rivers' innocence," he said, holding up his phone as if to display the recorded footage. "I call on the cabin crew and the airline's management to review these recordings and take swift, fair action." His statement was met with applause from several passengers, further cementing the shift in public sentiment. The crew, now visibly flustered, began to confer among themselves. Willis, the lead flight attendant, emerged with a calm but authoritative tone. "We will review all available evidence immediately," he announced over the intercom. "For the time being, I ask that everyone remain seated and allow our team to handle this matter." His words, though measured, conveyed a clear message: the situation was being taken seriously. In that charged moment, Tessa's position was further weakened. Her earlier attempts to assert control now appeared desperate and unfounded. As the tension slowly subsided, the focus shifted to ensuring that justice was done. The support for Simone Rivers had grown so strong that even the most skeptical passengers could no longer ignore the weight of the evidence. By the time the flight began its final descent, the incident had transformed from a single confrontation into a profound statement about dignity and accountability. Simone stood as a symbol of resilience, her unwavering calm a defiant counterpoint to the baseless accusations that had been hurled at her. And though Tessa Monroe's threats still lingered in the air, it was clear that the truth, captured by Marcus Allen's recording and endorsed by a collective of compassionate voices, was poised to prevail. As the tension in first class reached its boiling point, the situation took a dramatic turn. The confrontation that had begun over a disputed seat now escalated when security personnel were called to the cabin. Talia Monroe, the flight attendant whose aggressive stance had set the conflict in motion, seized the moment. With an air of cold authority, she announced that Ava Rivers must be detained for further questioning, a decision that shocked many passengers. Ava, seated with quiet dignity, had long maintained her composure in the face of Talia's baseless claims. However, when two uniformed security officers approached, their expressions stern, Ava felt a pang of disbelief. "I have a confirmed reservation," she tried to explain softly, her voice trembling yet determined. But Talia interrupted with a sharp, "Not on my watch," insisting that Ava was disrupting the order of the cabin. In that moment, the tension thickened as passengers watched in a mixture of horror and indignation. The officers moved swiftly, their presence authoritative yet mechanical in its execution. Ava was asked to stand, and as she did, her eyes met those of several fellow travelers who looked on with sympathetic concern. Talia, meanwhile, made no attempt to hide her satisfaction. With every step that led Ava toward the small area set aside for security processing, Talia's posture exuded a sense of control, as if this act of detainment would silence all dissent. A murmur spread through the cabin as whispers and gasps filled the air. Some passengers exchanged looks of disbelief. How could a woman, who had conducted herself so gracefully, be treated this way? Others, still influenced by Talia's earlier declarations, seemed reluctant to challenge the decision. The atmosphere was charged with conflicting emotions, fear, outrage, and a deep sense of injustice. As Ava was led away by the security team, her face remained resolute despite the discomfort and humiliation. She held her head high, silently asserting her innocence. In that moment, the cabin was transformed into a stage where authority clashed with individual dignity. The once orderly environment was now marred by a spectacle of power misuse. Evan Price, a lawyer seated a few rows back, had been watching the unfolding events with mounting alarm. He recognized that what was happening was more than a mere misunderstanding, it was a stark case of abuse of authority and racial bias. Without hesitation, Evan pulled out his smartphone and began recording the entire incident. His voice, clear and unyielding, echoed through the cabin as he said, "This is an injustice. I'm documenting everything." His intervention was not just a call for accountability, it was a rallying cry against the abuse of power. Within minutes, the recorded footage circulated among several passengers. Some watched in silent solidarity, while others began discussing the incident in hushed tones, their voices growing bolder with each passing moment. The atmosphere, once dominated by Talia's stern commands, now crackled with an undercurrent of resistance. Evan's recording served as undeniable evidence, a visual record that would soon expose the truth behind the detention of Ava Rivers. Meanwhile, Talia stood at the front of the cabin, her expression one of cold satisfaction. She reiterated that her actions were entirely in line with the airline's protocol, insisting that any disruption must be controlled for the safety and comfort of all first-class passengers. However, as the security officers escorted Ava toward a secluded area, it became evident that the decision had struck a chord with many on board. Several passengers exchanged glances of dismay, and a few even murmured that this was an act of blatant discrimination. The tension did not subside as the security team led Ava away. Instead, it only grew more intense as passengers awaited further instructions. Some began whispering among themselves about the abuse of power and the need for a fair investigation. A young professional in a sharp suit, unable to hide his indignation, leaned toward a companion and said, "This isn't right. No one should be treated like this, especially not in such a public way." His words, though barely audible, were met with nods of agreement. In the midst of this, Evan Price continued to record and quietly addressed the onlookers. "I urge all of you to remember this moment," he said, his tone both measured and powerful. "Accountability begins with speaking out. What you see here is not how any passenger should be treated." His message resonated deeply with those who had already grown uneasy with the unfolding events. The cabin, once a symbol of luxury and order, had now become the setting for a critical confrontation between authority and justice. The detained Ava, the unapologetic Talia, and the determined Evan had set the stage for a battle over dignity, a battle that would soon reverberate far beyond the confines of this flight. As the flight crew and security officers prepared to handle the next phase of the incident, the passengers remained in a state of heightened awareness. It was clear that this was no isolated event but part of a larger struggle against prejudice and abuse of power. With every whispered comment and every recording, the truth was slowly beginning to emerge. The solidarity among the passengers signaled that the tide was turning, one where the voices of the many would challenge the authority of the few. In that charged moment, as the flight continued on its long journey toward its destination, every person in the cabin understood that what they were witnessing was a defining moment. The actions taken in those few minutes would have consequences that extended well beyond the flight itself, sparking discussions about fairness, justice, and the rights of every traveler. By the time the aircraft began its descent toward New York, the repercussions of Ava Rivers' detention had rippled throughout the first-class cabin. The evidence captured by Evan Price and the murmurs of dissent from fellow passengers had begun to change the narrative. No longer was Ava's removal viewed solely through the lens of protocol, it had transformed into a glaring example of injustice that demanded accountability. As the plane's interior lights brightened for landing, a subdued but determined energy filled the cabin. Passengers who had once remained silent now exchanged knowing looks and whispered conversations, their expressions marked by a mix of outrage and empathy. A middle-aged woman in an elegant dress, her eyes filled with resolve, said softly to a neighbor, "I've seen the footage, and it's clear that what happened was completely wrong. Ava is innocent." Her words, though quiet, carried the weight of collective conviction. Evan Price, still holding his smartphone, scanned the faces of those around him. Many had reviewed the recorded footage, the undeniable proof of Talia Monroe's aggressive actions and the baseless justification for detaining Ava. The video had spread among passengers like wildfire, igniting a spark of public outrage within the enclosed space of the cabin. Evan's voice, steady and calm, carried a simple message: this evidence will show that Ava Rivers has been treated unfairly. We must stand for justice. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of unity. Some passengers began to speak up openly, recounting their own observations. A young man, who had been previously reserved, declared, "I witnessed Talia's harsh behavior. It's clear that Ava was never a threat. We need to ensure that this is reviewed by the proper authorities as soon as we land." His statement, echoed by others, amplified the call for fairness. In the midst of these developments, the cabin crew, once divided by conflicting loyalties, appeared increasingly determined to set things right. Willis, the lead flight attendant, called a brief meeting with his team near the galley. "We have a responsibility to our passengers," he said in a measured tone. "We must document every detail and share all evidence with airport security and airline management. It is our duty to ensure that every passenger is treated with respect and that any misuse of authority is addressed immediately." Talia Monroe, who had been at the center of the controversy, now appeared visibly shaken. Her once assured posture had given way to furtive glances and a hesitant tone. In hushed conversations with a fellow crew member, she murmured, "I followed protocol," but even she could not fully mask the uncertainty in her voice. The mounting evidence and a clear shift in passenger sentiment left little doubt that her actions were being questioned. Meanwhile, Ava Rivers, still detained by security, maintained her dignity despite the injustice. Behind a partition in the cabin service area, she sat with her head held high, her eyes reflecting both the pain of the ordeal and the inner strength that had carried her through. Although she could not speak at that moment, the silence around her conveyed a powerful message: her innocence was being recognized by those who truly understood the gravity of the situation. As the plane taxied toward the terminal, the collective energy of the passengers grew bolder. Some passengers, driven by a sense of civic duty, began recording additional interactions between the crew and security officers. They shared snippets of conversation, noting that the officers were beginning to acknowledge discrepancies in the incident report. One such snippet revealed a crew member admitting, "We're not sure the detention was warranted," which further bolstered the passengers' determination to seek justice. When the plane finally came to a stop and the seatbelt sign was switched off, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Passengers gathered near the exit, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama as security personnel escorted Talia Monroe away for further questioning. The once dominant narrative that had justified the detention was now disintegrating in the face of mounting evidence and collective public scrutiny. In that charged moment, Evan Price addressed the crowd quietly but firmly. "When we speak up and document what we see, truth prevails," he stated, his tone resonating with conviction. "This video evidence is just the beginning. I will ensure that this injustice is brought to light, not only for Ava but for all who are subjected to unfair treatment." His words, delivered with clarity, left an indelible mark on the passengers who had witnessed the incident. As the passengers finally disembarked from the plane, a sense of solidarity prevailed. Many exchanged contact information and promised to support one another in ensuring that their collective experience would lead to real changes within the airline. The injustice Ava Rivers had suffered was now a rallying cry, a testament to the power of community and the importance of speaking out against abuse of power. Once on the ground, the battle for justice had only just begun. The dramatic events aboard the flight had now spilled into the public sphere, and Ava Rivers' case was rapidly gaining traction. As the passengers filed out of Coral Bay International Airport, the once-contained incident in the first-class cabin had transformed into a larger fight against injustice and discrimination. Evan Price immediately arranged a meeting with airport security and airline management to share his recorded evidence. In a small conference room near the terminal, key officials gathered around a table as Evan presented his footage. The video showed, frame by frame, Talia Monroe's aggressive conduct and the unfair manner in which Ava was detained. The evidence was irrefutable, and it sparked an outcry among the officials. "This cannot stand," one manager declared, her tone resolute. "We must investigate this matter thoroughly." Meanwhile, Ava Rivers was taken into custody by security for what was presented as a routine investigation. However, the tone of the questioning and the treatment she received suggested that the process was far from routine, it was a deliberate effort to discredit her. The security officers, relying on Talia's biased report, questioned Ava in a cold and mechanical manner. Despite the invasive nature of the interrogation, Ava remained composed, her responses measured and dignified. She insisted on her innocence and maintained that her presence in first class was fully legitimate. News of the incident spread quickly through social media and local news outlets. Passengers who had been on the flight shared their accounts, and Evan's video went viral. The public was outraged at the blatant injustice that Ava had suffered. Protests and online petitions began to form, demanding that the airline address its discriminatory practices and hold Talia Monroe accountable for her actions. The story struck a chord with many, particularly within communities that had long faced similar prejudices. As the case moved to the legal arena, tensions in the courtroom soared. Ava's legal battle became the focal point of a larger conversation about civil rights in the airline industry. Evan Price led her legal team, passionately arguing that Ava had been wrongfully detained and that the actions of Talia Monroe constituted clear racial profiling. The courtroom was packed with supporters, and every piece of video evidence was scrutinized. Witnesses, including several passengers and crew members, testified about what they had seen that day. Their testimonies painted a picture of systemic bias, one that extended beyond the isolated incident. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric yet fraught with tension. Every time Evan Price presented a new piece of evidence, murmurs of agreement and shock swept through the audience. Ava sat quietly, her expression resolute despite the emotional toll of the proceedings. The judge, while impartial, acknowledged that the evidence raised serious questions about the airline's handling of the situation. Throughout the trial, the legal battle intensified. Evan Price's persistent efforts to secure justice for Ava met with resistance from those determined to maintain the status quo. Attorneys representing the airline argued that the security officers had acted according to established protocols. However, the overwhelming weight of eyewitness accounts and video evidence began to shift the balance in favor of Ava's case. The rigged system that many believed protected discriminatory practices was now being challenged head-on. In a shocking twist near the end of the trial, a high-ranking airline executive was called to testify. Under intense cross-examination, he revealed internal communications that suggested the airline had long ignored complaints about discriminatory behavior among its staff. This revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom and served as a turning point in the trial. The executive's testimony undermined the airline's defense and provided the jury with crucial evidence of systemic negligence. By the time the trial concluded, it was clear that justice was within reach. The jury's verdict, though delivered with somber gravity, vindicated Ava Rivers and sent a powerful message that no one was above accountability. The downfall of those who sought to frame her was imminent, and the ruling promised significant changes in the airline's policies. As the courtroom emptied, Ava emerged with a quiet strength. Her legal battle had not only cleared her name but had also ignited a broader movement for fairness in air travel. Evan Price, standing by her side, vowed to continue fighting for reform until every instance of prejudice was eradicated. The trial's outcome resonated far beyond the confines of the courtroom. It sparked discussions on racial profiling and employee accountability across the nation, offering hope to those who had long been silenced by injustice. In the aftermath, Ava's story became a beacon of resilience, a reminder that even against a corrupt system, the truth and persistence of a determined few can pave the way for lasting change. If you enjoyed this story and found its message inspiring, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support our channel. Your engagement helps us continue sharing powerful stories that stand for justice and equality. In the days following the dramatic trial, the air in the courtroom had been heavy with anticipation, and now, as the legal battle drew to its conclusion, a shocking twist emerged that would change everything. Evan Price's persistence had finally paid off, and the evidence he meticulously gathered became the key that unlocked the truth behind Ava Rivers' wrongful detention. After the jury delivered a resounding verdict in Ava's favor, the courtroom erupted in a subdued yet powerful demonstration of relief and triumph. The ruling not only vindicated Ava Rivers but also exposed the deep-seated corruption within the airline's handling of discriminatory practices. Behind the scenes, a series of internal emails and memos were unearthed, documents that revealed how Talia Monroe and a select few had been instructed to enforce policies in a manner that specifically targeted passengers of color. One particularly damning memo detailed directives that suggested certain staff members were to maintain first-class integrity by excluding individuals who didn't fit the profile. These revelations stunned everyone, shattering any remaining pretense that the detention was an isolated incident of misconduct. As news of the internal communications broke, public outrage spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with calls for accountability, and prominent civil rights organizations joined the movement demanding sweeping reforms within the airline. Evan Price, who had stood as the unyielding voice of truth throughout the ordeal, was hailed by many as a champion of justice. "This case isn't just about one flight," he later explained in an interview, "it's about challenging a system that allows prejudice to hide behind policies. Today, we've shown that even in the face of systemic corruption, persistence and evidence can bring about real change." For Ava Rivers, the verdict marked the beginning of a new chapter. Though the ordeal had left her emotionally scarred, she emerged with a quiet strength and a commitment to using her experience as a catalyst for broader change. Ava joined forces with Evan and several advocacy groups to push for comprehensive reforms in airline policies and staff training programs. Their efforts led to the establishment of an independent review board dedicated to ensuring that all passenger complaints were handled transparently and without bias. This board's creation was a significant step toward restoring public trust, as it promised that future incidents would be thoroughly investigated and that accountability would be maintained at every level. In the weeks that followed, Talia Monroe's once unassailable position crumbled. Facing mounting disciplinary actions and a barrage of negative press, she was ultimately suspended pending a full internal investigation. The airline, under intense scrutiny from regulators and the public alike, was forced to acknowledge the systemic failures that had allowed discriminatory practices to persist. Senior executives were held accountable, and several high-ranking officials resigned in the wake of the scandal. The downfall of those who had framed Ava Rivers was not swift, but it was inevitable. The internal investigation uncovered a disturbing pattern of bias and abuse of power that extended well beyond a single incident. With every new piece of evidence, the narrative of injustice was reinforced. The final report concluded that Talia Monroe, along with a small cadre of complicit employees, had deliberately manipulated procedures to target and discredit passengers based on race. The report recommended immediate termination, restitution to the affected individuals, and mandatory diversity training for all staff. Public response to the verdict and the subsequent fallout was overwhelmingly supportive of Ava and her advocates. News outlets, once reluctant to cover the story in detail, now provided extensive coverage, highlighting the systemic issues that had been exposed. Community leaders, civil rights organizations, and even some members of the airline industry praised the outcome as a turning point, a clear signal that discrimination and abuse of power would no longer be tolerated. In one particularly moving moment, as Ava Rivers addressed a press conference alongside Evan Price, she said, "Today, we have proven that no matter how deep the corruption, the truth will always have a way of emerging. I stand here not only for myself but for every person who has ever been marginalized by injustice. Let this victory remind us all that resilience and unity are the first steps toward lasting change." That day, as the Miami sun shone brightly over Coral Bay International Airport, the atmosphere outside reflected the hope that had ignited inside the courtroom and on the flight. Ava Rivers, supported by a community of determined individuals and empowered by the evidence of her innocence, had transformed a harrowing experience into a powerful movement for reform. Evan Price's unwavering commitment to exposing the truth had led to a groundbreaking shift, one that promised to reshape the industry and ensure that justice, no matter how hard fought, would always prevail. If you found this story meaningful, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful narratives that inspire change and uphold justice for all. In life, we often face moments when the very essence of our dignity is challenged by baseless assumptions and unfair treatment. The story of Simone Rivers on that red-eye flight reminds us that our self-worth is not defined by the judgment or prejudice of others, but by our steadfast commitment to our truth and integrity. Despite being accused without cause, Simone's quiet confidence and unwavering resolve became a beacon of resilience, inspiring those around her to stand up for fairness and respect. Her journey underscores the power of inner strength and the importance of remaining true to oneself, even when confronted with injustice or discrimination. In a world that can sometimes be unkind, it is crucial to recognize that each challenge is an opportunity to affirm our rights and to set an example for others. When we let our actions speak louder than baseless accusations, we not only reclaim our dignity but also pave the way for a more just and compassionate society. Let this story serve as a powerful reminder that unity, courage, and self-respect can transform even the most daunting trials into catalysts for positive change. Every time you stand firm in the face of adversity, you contribute to a ripple effect of hope and resilience that can inspire others to do the same. If this message resonates with you and you believe in the power of truth and dignity, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories that uplift, empower, and remind us that respect and justice are values worth fighting for every day.